It looks like I'm next. Thank you all for really an extraordinary set of witness statements today. The country between 1919 and 1933 had its experiment with alcohol prohibition. And if you read some of the literature about it, for example, a great book I read called Last Call by, I think it's Michael Okrent, you'll find that prohibition succeeded basically in building up organized crime in America and organized criminal groupings, which got very rich and succeeded in corrupting the police, the judiciary, and so on, and basically set the society at war against itself. And when we repealed prohibition, it wasn't because of a unanimous feeling that alcohol was good for everybody in all circumstances, but simply that the costs and the harms of criminalizing alcohol were far worse than giving people the right to make their own choices about their lives. And I think we're very much in the same place today, and we're also hearing some of the same propaganda and hysteria about marijuana that people invoked in a last-ditch effort to save prohibition. Ms. Snyder, let me come to you. Back to this point about overdoses, because we heard a lot about overdoses, and I'd actually introduced the medical marijuana law in Maryland and decriminalization in Maryland, and one of the witnesses got up and cited an article saying that in the 24 hours after Colorado legalized marijuana, 37 people died of marijuana overdoses, and then proceeded to launch into a diatribe about the horrors of marijuana legalization. Well, it turned out he was quoting from The Onion, or another comedy website, and you know, a staff member brought me the article he was quoting from, and I didn't want to embarrass him, but I did say, you know, would this change your opinion if you knew that this article was false? And he said, well, I would certainly have to rethink my position a lot, but of course then went on to make other arguments. I guess the question that I want to ask you, Ms. Snyder, is to what extent have you thought about this analogy culturally and socially and politically and legally between what happened with liquor prohibition over a period of 15 years or so versus this marijuana prohibition, which has been going on at least from the state level for a century and at the federal level for 50 years, which means that the harms have been even worse than the harms of alcohol prohibition. What did you see in terms of your work as a cop in New York?
Well, I saw that once, so prohibition of alcohol, we saw how the nation responded. We saw that once it started to become more morally acceptable or more societally acceptable by general consensus, people were like, okay, we'll legalize it and regulate it. We're starting to see that now with cannabis. We're seeing over 90% of the population is just so attuned to thinking it's completely acceptable, completely normal. And that's what I was seeing on the street as a police officer. No one really discouraged, I don't want to say no one encouraged, but it wasn't looked at as taboo as it once was.
Right. And so, Mr. Friedman, let me come to you, because you've had a lot of experience with this at the state level and at the local level. Do you think the country is living through a transformation like the end of prohibition, and we're discovering what it means to enter the post-marijuana prohibition era governmentally and commercially at the same time?
Thank you, Chairman. I would go as far to say they've already gone through that as the people of the United States. I think for the vast majority of consumers and patients who now deal with cannabis, they deal with it in what they view as a post-prohibition world. Kind of the last people to consider post-prohibition is the Hill and Congress and the United States. The fact is, kind of the only things missing now are the sort of common sense regulation and science that our institutions of government could bring to it.
So, Mr. Armentano, do you think Congress can catch up with where a majority of the states are now in terms of medical marijuana and decriminalization and legalization, as the mayor said? Do you think Congress will actually be able to do it? I know this hearing is a promising sign, but what do you think are the chances of our actually doing this in this session of Congress or the next?
Well, my business card doesn't say prognosticator, but certainly one would hope that members of Congress see the need to act swiftly Look, to use your analogy with alcohol prohibition, the federal government got out of the alcohol prohibition business when 10 states chose to go down a different path. The majority of U.S. states have now chosen to go down a different path with cannabis, and it is untenable to keep this chasm going between where the states are on this policy and where the federal government is. At the end of the day, the federal government needs to come to a way to comport federal policy with state policy, and that's by descheduling.
Thank you very much. My time has expired.